Hello and welcome to another HanDrinksSolo wine info video, this time on the Bloemendal SuiderTerras Sauvignon Blanc 2016. Now, we were incredibly excited to get hold of this wine. They only make 3 barrels of it each year. The SuiderTerras Block on Bloemendal Estate was planted back in 1982. Now, this is significant because Sauvignon vines, for the most part, usually get grubbed up at around 20 years of age. They don't often go much longer than that. Unlike grapes like Muscat of Alexandria or a Grenache vine or a Cinsault, which seem to be able to semi-regularly age up to 100 years and still have a yield that is vaguely viable. Now, although this block is old, it is not the oldest Sauvignon block in the country. That belongs to the Amos Block in the Swartland, which is a block of bush vines planted back in 1965. And the fruit from those vines is used to make a fascinating Fino-style sherry called the Amos Block, which is bottled by the Spice Route. But back to the SuiderTerras. The 39 years that these vines have been in the ground have had quite an effect on their ability to bear fruit. So yields are down to as low as 940, 950 kilograms per hectare, which is quite something when you consider that a commercially farmed block of Sauvignon Blanc vines usually produce about 10 to 12 tons per hectare. So as you can see, the juice really does have to be worth the squeeze to make a wine in such small quantities. And it also goes some way to explain why the wine retails for between 300 and 350 Rand per bottle. Also, when you bear in mind that only the very topmost rows in this famous SuiderTerras block actually get to make it into the SuiderTerras wine, you can see why only 3 barrels are made each year. Okay, but what of the wine in the glass? Well, first of all, you'll see it's got a beautiful, deep, rich gold color. And this is for 2 reasons. First of all, it's a wine that's seen 11 months in oak. You can often tell whether a wine has been oaked or not simply by looking at the color. It'll have a richer, golder hue to it. The second reason is that it is a 2016 vintage, which means you're beginning to see a little bit of color change as a result of aging and micro-oxygenation in the bottle. So moving on from the color, when you get a chance to sniff this guy, he has an absolutely gargantuan Andre the Giant-sized schnoz that just rushes up out of the glass to meet you before you get anywhere near it. Now, like the way we dissected the color, we can also explain these aromas one component at a time. Now, age in a wine has a smell all of its own. It's usually called tertiary aromas. And when you smell a white wine that has had some age on it, it can present with notes of hay or honey or nuts or even kerosene, which is usually associated with a grape like Riesling. Now, this guy has all of those in abundance except for perhaps the kerosene. So having dealt with the tertiary aromas, we can also pick up some secondary aromas. Now, it's pretty obvious that this wine has seen some oak. We, of course, guessed it by looking at the color, but when you smell it and you get those notes of vanilla and nutmeg and cinnamon, it's very clear that this wine has seen some wood. And in fact, the truth is, much to the outrage of the fashion police, this SuiderTerras 2016 has seen 100% new oak. All 3 barrels being new. And perhaps one could argue that it might have been a slightly more nuanced wine if one of the barrels had been old and given less of an effect than the 2 new barrels. Perhaps there would have been a louder fruiter expression. But it's neither here nor there really, because the SuiderTerras is designed to be a big icon wine, and as such it delivers in spades. Because despite being masked in part by age and in part by oak, there are layers of delicious fruit in this wine. And that's why the other argument against older oak would be that actually the fruit in the wine stands up to the oak treatment. And what you've got is layers and layers of peach and mandarin and some herbal elements and some florals in there as well. It really is quite an engaging wine on the nose, which means that long before you even get to sipping it, you've already had half the joy just sniffing it. And speaking of sipping, you can really take the same approach when tasting a wine that you do when smelling it. Now, one thing you won't pick up when sniffing this particular wine is just how incredibly concentrated the fruit is on the palate. Part of the reason for the incredible fruit concentration is because of those very, very low yields that we mentioned earlier. Because what happens is these old vines produce far fewer bunches of fruit. And then their root system, which is designed to bring nutrients up into the plant and into the fruit, instead of having to bring certain amounts of nutrients up and split it across countless large bunches of grapes, they can in fact send those nutrients into far fewer grapes. And so you get a higher concentration of flavor compounds when your yield is lower. So when you're trying to learn about a wine just by sipping and sniffing it, say in a blind tasting, for example, I find it really helpful to try and deconstruct it the same way that we have tonight. So we can talk about fruit and mineral elements and herbal elements like we did today. And these all come from the actual grapes themselves. And then you can move on to ask yourself, do I smell nutmeg or clove or vanilla, which would come from oak? And finally, you can say, does the fruit feel dried? Or is there a kind of kerosene element to it? Or is there perhaps some hay or some honey notes, which can, on a white wine, indicate a sense of age? And you, of course, piece that together with the fact that your color might be much darker, and then come up with an answer that at least sounds vaguely intelligent, even if it's wrong. Okay, so I've been drinking this guy over a couple of days, and it really does present as quite different from day to day. So don't feel locked in by anything that I've said here. This is more just a framework for you to break down what's going on when you encounter a wine of this complexity. What I will say is that this wine deserves your time and attention. So pour yourself a glass, sit quietly, let the wine do the talking, and then when you're done, you can serve dinner afterwards. Now, if you have any questions about Sauvignon Blanc or old vines or Bloemendal or altitude or tertiary, secondary and primary aromas, please feel free to drop a comment in the section below, and I will do my best to get back to you.